Stories told around ancient fires secretly controlled who ruled and who followed for thousands of years. We are beginning to unravel the fabric of how myths concealed power struggles across generations. From pharaohs claiming divine birth to modern political campaigns, mythology remains humanity's most powerful and enduring tool for social control. By the end of our journey, you will see the hidden architecture of every society you thought you knew. How did a simple story make a king's power feel as natural as the sunrise? Why do the same narrative patterns appear in cultures separated by oceans and centuries? What is the one question we should be asking about the stories we are told today? The whispers of our ancestors were never just entertainment around a fire. They were the original blueprints for civilization itself. Long before written law, these stories became the invisible architecture of society, a way to encode values and rules into the very identity of a community. In this fragile new world of settlements and agriculture, survival depended on cooperation, and cooperation required a shared understanding of how things should be. Who leads, who follows, why is this family in charge? The answers could not be enforced by armies alone, for armies were small and loyalties were local. Instead, they were woven into the fabric of the cosmos through mythology. A chief did not simply claim power, he claimed descent from a sun god. The social order was not presented as a convenient human arrangement, but as a sacred reflection of the heavenly hierarchy. This was the genius of early power, embedding its own justification into the foundational stories everyone learned as children. It made the political field geological, as permanent and unchangeable as a mountain range. These stories created a powerful psychological reality, framing obedience as piety and questioning as blasphemy. The patterns set in those ancient times became a recurring script. The names of the gods changed, the heroes wore different faces, but the underlying message remained strikingly consistent. Authority is natural, preordained, and ultimately for your own good. The coronation of an Egyptian pharaoh was a profound cosmic event. He did not simply take a throne, he became the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god, stepping into a role scripted by the gods at the dawn of time. This was the ultimate mechanism of control, divine sanction, a tool so powerful it could erase the scent of blood and ambition from a ruler's rise, replacing it with the perfume of destiny. By weaving their authority directly into the tapestry of myth, rulers transformed a brutal power grab into a sacred, cosmic necessity. In Mesopotamia, kings claimed they were chosen by the gods in a divine assembly. In the Andes, the Sapa Inca was the son of the sun itself. Across the world, royal genealogies were meticulously fabricated, tracing a bloodline back to a deity, making the king's word a divine decree. To challenge him was not mere treason, it was blasphemy, a direct assault on the order of the universe. This system was brilliantly self-perpetuating. Consider the Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven. An emperor ruled because heaven willed it, but if floods devastated the land or rebels succeeded, that same mythology provided the explanation. Heaven had withdrawn its favor. The failure was not political, it was cosmological. This meant that even a victorious rebel, a new man seizing power, had to immediately claim the very same divine mandate he had just overthrown. He had to wrap his new, raw power in the old, sacred stories to make it legitimate. The real power struggle, the violent contest for control, was completely concealed beneath this unchangeable narrative of divine will. It made the throne seem as natural and inevitable as the rising sun, a fixture of the world rather than a prize to be won. But if mythology could make a king's power feel preordained, its next trick was even more ambitious, structuring the very layers of society itself. But this divine sanction was not reserved for rulers alone. It was projected across the entire social landscape, transforming rigid human hierarchies into something as unchangeable as the stars. Picture the ancient caste system of India, a structure of breathtaking complexity and permanence. Its power did not come from royal decrees alone, but from a story, a profound creation myth found in the Rig Veda. Society was not invented by men, it was born from the cosmic sacrifice of the primordial being, Purusha. From his mouth came the priests, the Brahmins. From his arms, the warriors and rulers, the Kshatriyas. From his thighs, the merchants and artisans, the Vaishyas. And from his feet, the laborers, the Shudras. This was not a social contract, it was a cosmic blueprint. Your place in the world, the work you did, the people you could marry, was not a matter of chance or injustice. It was your literal origin, your piece of the universe's original body. To challenge your role was to disrupt the very order of creation. This pattern of naturalizing inequality echoes across civilizations. In Plato's Republic, citizens are told a noble lie that the gods mixed different metals into their souls. Gold for the rulers, silver for the auxiliaries, and bronze or iron for the farmers and craftsmen. Your social class was not an accident of birth, but a reflection of your soul's metallic composition, a destiny to be accepted, not questioned. Centuries later in medieval Europe, the Great Chain of Being painted a similar picture of a universe where every single thing, from God down to the lowliest pebble, had a fixed, divinely appointed place. The king was below the angels, the peasant was below the king, and the woman was below the man. This was not a power structure, it was a sacred ladder, a perfect and unchangeable hierarchy. The psychological impact of this narrative alchemy was devastatingly effective. A peasant toiling in the fields did not simply see himself as poor or exploited. He saw himself as fulfilling his God-given role in the universal order. His suffering was not a sign of social failure, but a test of piety, a part of the divine plan. Discontent was not channeled into rebellion, but inward, into prayer or resignation. The system became psychologically self-policing. By framing social arrangements as cosmic principles, mythology dissolved the very language of protest. How can you argue against the universe itself? This embedding of hierarchy into sacred story created social systems of incredible stability, structures that could endure for millennia, weathering famines, wars, and the rise and fall of empires, because the real battle for control had already been won in the realm of myth. Yet, the ultimate consolidation of power required one more masterful move, the control of knowledge itself. A single, sacred symbol carved into a temple wall held power not from its shape, but from its secrecy. For the vast majority of people in the ancient world, the stories that governed their lives were locked behind a barrier of inaccessible knowledge. The third mechanism of control was the monopoly on interpretation, a power held by a special class of individuals who alone could read the omens, perform the rituals, and translate the will of the gods. These priestly elites became the indispensable gatekeepers of divine wisdom, the only bridge between a fearful population and the unpredictable forces of the cosmos. In Egypt, the ability to decipher hieroglyphs was a skill reserved for a tiny, educated priesthood. They were the accountants of the soul, the only ones who could perform the spells from the Book of the Dead to guide a pharaoh into the afterlife. Their power was so immense that a ruler depended on them completely for his own eternal salvation. In India, the intricate Vedic rituals, the precise chants and offerings that maintained cosmic order, could only be performed by the Brahmin caste. They held the exclusive manual for keeping the universe running smoothly, making their role not just privileged but essential for society's very survival. And in medieval Europe, where the vast population was illiterate and the Bible was written in a language they could not understand, the parish priest stood as the sole interpreter of God's law. He told you what was a sin and what was virtue, what would send you to hell and what would grant you grace. This control over the sacred narrative created a perfect circle of power. The king or emperor provided the political and military might, while the priestly class provided the divine justification, each propping up the other in a symbiotic relationship that left little room for dissent from below. But the true genius of this system was not just its rigidity, but its astonishing flexibility. When a new dynasty seized power, the scholars could unearth an ancient prophecy that had always foretold their rise. When a social rule became inconvenient, a fresh interpretation of a dusty text could provide a loophole. The myths themselves remained constant, their words carved in stone, but their meanings could be subtly shifted to serve the needs of the present moment. This created an ideological structure that was both timeless and adaptable, able to weather political earthquakes without ever admitting that the foundations had cracked. The stories could bend without breaking, ensuring that the appearance of sacred tradition was maintained even as the reality of power changed hands. A city on the brink of internal revolt holds a power far more dangerous to its rulers than any foreign army. The fourth mechanism of control offered a brilliant solution: scapegoating and the creation of external threats. When domestic tensions, economic strife, or class conflicts threatened to boil over, the ruling powers could redirect that simmering anger outward toward a mythological enemy. This was not a simple political trick. It was a narrative alchemy that transformed internal political conflict into a cosmic battle between order and chaos. The very fabric of society, woven together by shared stories, could be tightened against a common foe. One of the oldest templates for this comes from the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish. In this story, the world is created from the violent struggle between the young god Marduk and the primordial chaos monster, Tiamat. Marduk slays her, and from her body he fashions the ordered universe. This myth provided a powerful blueprint. Any political enemy could be cast in the role of Tiamat, a force of utter chaos that must be violently defeated to preserve civilization itself. The real, messy power struggles within the city walls were suddenly reframed as a sacred, existential war. This pattern repeats across history. The ancient Greeks drew a sharp line between themselves, the civilized people, and everyone else, the barbarians, a word that mimicked the sound of incomprehensible foreign languages. This was not just a cultural observation. It was a mythological boundary that defined who was inside the circle of order and who was a threat to it. In medieval Europe, crusades were fueled by narratives that painted religious outsiders as existential dangers to Christendom, channeling the energies of restless nobles and discontented peasants toward a distant enemy. The psychological brilliance of this approach is chillingly effective. When a harvest fails or a plague strikes, the people's fear and frustration need an outlet. It is far safer for those in power to provide a scapegoat, a witch, a heretic, an infidel, or a neighboring tribe, than to allow that anger to question the legitimacy of the king or the fairness of the social order. The ruling structure positions itself not as the cause of the problem, but as the only thing standing between the people and annihilation. It transforms vulnerability into a source of strength, rallying the population around the very authorities who might otherwise be the target of their rage. This externalization of conflict obscures the internal power dynamics completely. The peasant no longer sees the nobleman as the one hoarding grain. but as the valiant leader protecting the village from the monstrous other. This unifying focus on an external threat solidifies the existing hierarchy, making it appear essential for survival. And just as mythology was used to structure society and direct its fears, it was also meticulously employed to define the most intimate of power relations, the roles of men and women. The hearth and the battlefield were mythologically mapped onto the female and the male, creating a world where power was not just held but gendered. In the Greek home, the goddess Hestia embodied the sacred, stationary fire, a symbol of a woman's virtuous and immobile role within the domestic sphere. Athena, while a powerful strategist born from Zeus's head, represented a wisdom that served the state and warfare, domains dominated by men. These were not just stories about gods, they were divine blueprints for human society, carefully defining what women could be while systematically excluding them from the levers of direct political power. This pattern of using mythology to sanctify patriarchal control is one of the most pervasive and enduring applications of narrative power. The biblical account of Eve, fashioned from Adam's rib, established a foundational hierarchy. Woman was derivative of man, created for him, and her subsequent temptation of Adam framed female curiosity as the original source of sin and human suffering. This single narrative has echoed for millennia, justifying the subordination of women as a divine consequence. Similarly, in the Hindu epic Ramayana, the figure of Sita, with her unwavering loyalty and chastity despite being unjustly exiled by her husband Rama, became the archetype of ideal wifely devotion. Her story embedded a specific form of feminine virtue into the cosmic order, a virtue defined by submission and sacrifice. The genius of this mechanism was its profound intimacy. It did not just dictate laws, it shaped identities. A woman learned that her piety was measured by her obedience, that her very nature was tied to nurturing and passivity. This made patriarchal control feel less like an external imposition and more like an internal truth, the fulfillment of a sacred destiny written in the stars. Even the existence of powerful goddesses was often carefully contained. Fertility deities like Demeter or Isis held immense sway over life and death, but their power was typically channeled into domains like motherhood and agriculture, which reinforced traditional roles rather than challenging the overall political structure dominated by male gods and kings. Their narratives emphasized nurturing and emotional strength, qualities that, while respected, kept them from embodying sovereign authority in the way a Zeus or an Odin did. This deep psychological embedding created systems of gender control with incredible resilience. Long after empires fell and new political systems arose, these mythologically enforced roles persisted, woven into the fabric of family life, personal faith, and self-perception. They showed that mythology's most potent power lies not in commanding armies, but in scripting the inner lives of individuals, making the struggle for power a silent war fought within the human heart and home. A peasant's aching back and empty stomach could be transformed into a spiritual offering through the right story. This is the sixth mechanism of control, the economic justification through myth, a way to make profound material inequality feel not only acceptable but sacred. For the medieval serf tied to a lord's land, the grinding labor was not mere exploitation. The Church taught that his suffering was a reflection of Christ's own passion, a trial that purified the soul and guaranteed a glorious reward in the afterlife. His poverty was framed not as a social condition, but as a spiritual advantage, a test of faith that the rich, burdened by their wealth, might fail. This narrative flipped the script on economic reality, making the very system that created his hardship the very path to his salvation. A similar, breathtakingly efficient logic operated through the Hindu concept of karma and rebirth. Your station in this life, whether you were born into a palace or a hovel, was not a random injustice. It was the precise and deserved consequence of your actions in a past life. To protest your poverty was to protest a cosmic balance sheet you yourself had written. This encouraged a profound acceptance of the economic order, directing ambition inward towards spiritual improvement in the next life, rather than outward towards social change in this one. Centuries later, the Protestant work ethic performed a different but equally potent kind of alchemy. In this narrative, hard work and financial success were not just personal achievements, they were visible signs of God's favor. Conversely, poverty could be interpreted not as bad luck or systemic failure, but as evidence of idleness or a lack of divine grace. This made wealth seem morally earned and poverty seem like a personal failing, effectively absolving the economic system itself from any blame. The sheer genius of these economic myths was their psychological bidirectionality. They offered a comforting story to everyone involved. The wealthy could enjoy their privilege with a clean conscience, viewing their good fortune as a divine reward for virtue or diligent work. The poor, meanwhile, were offered a deeply needed sense of dignity and purpose within their struggle. Their hardship was not meaningless, it was a sacred test or a necessary step on a long cosmic journey. This dual satisfaction dramatically reduced the social friction that raw inequality naturally produces. It transformed potential class resentment into pious endurance, and violent power struggles over resources into quiet, personal spiritual quests. The real, material relationships of lord and serf, of capitalist and laborer, were mystified, hidden behind a veil of spiritual narrative that made the economic structure feel as eternal and right as the heavens themselves. And just as mythology could define a person's place in the economy, it could also forge something much larger, an entire national identity, uniting millions under a single, powerful banner. The story of a city began with two brothers, a bloody quarrel, and a she-wolf who nursed the victor. The myth of Romulus and Remus was far more than a charming origin tale for Rome. It was a political blueprint written in the language of legend. Romulus did not just found a city, he established a pattern of authority by killing his own brother, setting a brutal precedent that conflict would be resolved through supreme, unquestioned power. His subsequent act of building walls and inviting in outcasts established a template for territorial expansion and assimilation that would define Roman imperialism for 1,000 years. This is the seventh mechanism of control, the foundation myth, a story that conceals the messy, ongoing negotiations of power by presenting the current social arrangement as the inevitable fulfillment of a primordial destiny. Across the globe, cultures have used these creation stories to forge a unified national identity from a collection of disparate tribes and conflicting interests. The American doctrine of manifest destiny was not merely a policy of westward expansion, it was a powerful national myth. It framed the conquest of a continent and the displacement of native peoples as the fulfillment of a divine purpose, a preordained mission to spread democracy and civilization. This narrative transformed a complex, often violent historical process into a simple, moral inevitability. Similarly, the modern state of Israel grounds its political legitimacy in ancient biblical narratives of a covenant between God and Abraham, linking contemporary statehood to a sacred promise made millennia ago. These stories create what scholars call a chosen people mentality. A community comes to see itself not as a random collection of individuals, but as a group with a unique historical mission that transcends ordinary moral considerations. Your nation's actions are not judged by the same standards as others because your people are fulfilling a cosmic destiny. The political utility of this is immense. It transforms contingent, messy historical events, the outcomes of battles, treaties, and political deals, into the inevitable unfolding of a preordained pattern. The current power structure, whoever holds the reins of government, appears not as a temporary winner in a political contest, but as the natural culmination of a sacred history. This makes any challenge to that authority seem like an attack on the community's very soul and destiny. To question a policy becomes an act of cultural betrayal, a rejection of your people's ancient identity. These myths connect the past, the present, and the future into a single, unbreakable chain of purpose, all in service of justifying the power arrangements of today. And when those arrangements are threatened, this same mythological engine is often ignited to fuel its most destructive application, the machinery of war. A Spartan warrior did not march to his death for a king or a piece of land alone. He fought for a story, one that promised his name would live forever in the songs of his people, that his sacrifice would echo in the halls of the gods. This is the eighth mechanism of control, the weaponization of heroic mythology, a process that transformed the brutal, political calculus of war into a sacred, cosmic crusade. Across civilizations, rulers consistently draped their military ambitions in the grand narratives of myth, framing their conflicts as epic struggles between order and chaos, light and darkness, civilization and barbarism. The real, material reasons for war, control of trade routes, access to resources, the consolidation of political power, were cleverly concealed beneath this majestic, spiritual veil. In ancient Greece, the entire culture was steeped in the heroic ideals of the Iliad. A soldier was not just a man with a spear, he was a new Achilles or Hector, striving for Cleos, that immortal glory that outshone a long, quiet life. His death was not a meaningless end, but a climactic moment in a poem that had been recited for generations. The Norse warrior dreamed not of a grave, but of Valhalla, where the god Odin himself would welcome him to an eternal feast among the Einherjar. His death in battle was a ticket to a divine afterlife, a far more compelling prospect than dying old and forgotten. In feudal Japan, the Bushido Code was not merely a set of military tactics, it was a spiritual path, deeply infused with Zen and Shinto beliefs, that framed a samurai's loyalty and willingness to die for his lord as the ultimate expression of honor. To die well was to achieve a perfection of spirit. Similarly, the concept of shahid, or martyrdom in Islam, offers a profound theological meaning to death in defense of faith, elevating the fallen warrior to a special status in the afterlife. The breathtaking effectiveness of this mechanism lies in how it addresses the most profound human fear, the terror of mortality. Facing the chaos of the battlefield, a soldier is offered a story that gives his potential death transcendent meaning. His sacrifice is not for a politician's greed, but for the defense of everything sacred and ordered against the forces of darkness. This narrative is psychologically irresistible. It turns fear into courage and turns a political pawn into a willing hero. For the rulers, this was the ultimate strategic advantage. They could raise vast armies and send them into horrific conflicts, all while presenting themselves not as seekers of power and wealth, but as humble defenders of cosmic order, as champions of the gods. The true power dynamics, the fact that the king's political survival or economic enrichment was the real prize, were completely obscured. The young man dying in the mud was not thinking about tax revenues or territorial expansion. He was thinking about his place in an eternal story. This transformation of raw political violence into spiritual duty represents one of mythology's most potent and tragic concealments, making the ultimate exploitation, the demand for a citizen's life, feel like the highest honor. And just as mythology could command the loyalty of soldiers, It could also dictate humanity's relationship with the world around them, scripting our role in the very environment we depend on for survival. A river was never just water, it was a goddess whose moods demanded reverence and whose blessings required correct rituals. Long before environmental policy existed, mythology scripted humanity's relationship with the natural world, a relationship that could be carefully managed to serve those in power. This ninth mechanism, environmental control through cosmic narratives, allowed rulers and priests to frame land use and resource allocation not as practical decisions, but as matters of divine will, concealing economic exploitation beneath a veil of sacred duty. Indigenous creation myths often wove people into the landscape as kin, establishing reciprocal relationships with forests, animals, and rivers. These stories promoted sustainable practices, but their underlying structure, a sacred bond to place, could be co-opted. Colonial powers did exactly this, crafting their own myths of divine right and manifest destiny to justify seizing lands they labeled empty or untamed. The earth was no longer a living relative, but a resource, a divine gift given specifically to them to conquer and cultivate. This narrative transformed violent territorial expansion into a holy mission. The biblical concept of dominion, interpreted by many as a God-given license to subdue the earth, provided a powerful ideological engine for this expansion. It framed the natural world as something separate from and subordinate to humanity, its value measured only by its utility. This was not a neutral observation. It was a theological justification for an economic system built on extraction. Similarly, in India, the profound mythology surrounding sacred rivers like the Ganges established a vital spiritual connection. Yet this very sanctity could be leveraged by priestly classes who controlled access to purification rituals, effectively managing a critical water resource through religious authority rather than transparent governance. The genius of this environmental mythology was its ability to make political and economic arrangements feel like cosmic principles. A king who claimed vast hunting preserves was not hoarding resources for his own pleasure. He was acting as a steward of lands sacred to the gods. A feudal lord who demanded a portion of every harvest was not merely extracting wealth. He was upholding an agricultural order that reflected the celestial cycle of seasons, an order maintained by his divinely appointed position. By presenting these resource distributions as spiritually mandated, the system dissolved questions of fairness. How could you argue against a practice that pleased the rain god or honored the earth mother? This narrative alchemy directed attention away from the human power structures benefiting from the land and toward the performance of proper rituals to appease the forces of nature. It made the environment itself a silent partner in maintaining the social hierarchy, its very bounty or failure seen as a divine judgment on the community's piety, rather than a result of the ruler's wise or foolish policies. This final extension of mythological control over our most fundamental relationship with the natural world reveals the ultimate flexibility of these ancient stories. They could sanctify both preservation and pillage, dictate both reverence and conquest, all while ensuring that the real struggle over who controls the water, the land, and the food remained hidden behind the unassailable curtain of cosmic law. But the very stories that built these ancient walls of power could also become the hammers that smashed them. Mythology possesses a remarkable dual nature, a 10th mechanism where these same narrative structures become tools for radical social change. The Protestant Reformation did not begin with a rejection of Christianity, but with a fierce, competing interpretation of its core myths. Martin Luther and other reformers argued that the Catholic Church had corrupted the true message of the Bible, that salvation came through faith alone, not through rituals controlled by a distant priesthood. They did not throw out the sacred book, they reclaimed it, using its stories to justify a political and religious revolution that shattered the unity of medieval Europe. This pattern reveals a crucial rule of narrative power. Successful challengers rarely invent a new mythology from scratch. Instead, they position their movement as a return to a purer, more authentic form of the old stories, a restoration of a truth that has been corrupted by the current powers. The American civil rights movement drew its profound moral strength and unifying imagery from the biblical Exodus, the epic story of a people led out of bondage. Marchers sang spirituals about the promised land, framing their struggle for legal equality not as a modern political demand, but as the latest chapter in an ancient, divine story of liberation. Similarly, anti-colonial movements across Africa and Asia frequently resurrected pre-colonial myths and heroic histories. They reclaimed narratives that imperial powers had dismissed as primitive, using them to forge a new national identity and challenge the legitimacy of foreign rule. By saying our ancestors were kings and philosophers, not savages, they dismantled the mythological justification for their own subjugation. What makes this so fascinating is that even those fighting for change are forced to battle on the terrain of mythology. They must speak a language the people already understand, using familiar symbols and archetypes to make their new vision feel inevitable, even traditional. This conceals the raw power struggle just as effectively as the old regime did. The revolutionary, like the king, must present their cause as a sacred destiny, obscuring the complex material interests and political calculations driving their position. The battle is never just over land or laws. It is over the soul of the story itself, a war of interpretation where the winner gets to write the next chapter of what everyone believes is true. And one of the most enduring arenas for this silent war over meaning is the very system designed to distribute justice, the law. A king's law was never just his own command. It arrived inscribed on a stone stele handed down from the sun god himself. This is the 11th mechanism of control, the fusion of legal systems with mythological precedent, a masterstroke that transformed human rules into divine decrees, placing them beyond question or revolt. The most famous early example is the Code of Hammurabi. The Babylonian king did not present his laws as a clever political compromise. The stone monument shows him receiving the code from the sun god Shamash, the god of justice. The laws themselves, however detailed and practical, were framed not as Hammurabi's wisdom, but as the revealed will of a deity. This single act of narrative genius set a template that would be replicated for millennia. Moses descending from Mount Sinai with tablets from Yahweh is another foundational moment. The law was not negotiated, it was delivered. Its authority came not from its practical benefits, but from its divine source. This pattern created what legal scholars call a nomos, a unified normative universe where a society's laws, its myths, and its deepest sense of what is right all blend into a single, self-evident reality. The rules do not feel imposed, they feel natural, as inherent to the world as gravity. Roman law was saturated with religious ritual. The College of Pontiffs were the original legal experts, interpreting the will of the gods through omens and ensuring that public life conformed to divine law. In India, Hindu law derived directly from the Dharma Shastras, texts that wove legal injunctions into vast cosmological narratives about Dharma, the moral order of the universe. Your legal duty was your spiritual duty. Islamic Sharia, rooted in the stories and commandments of the Quran, presents a complete legal and social framework as an expression of divine wisdom. The sheer effectiveness of this approach lies in a profound psychological shift. It makes compliance with man-made rules a matter of spiritual purity and personal identity. A person obeys the law not just to avoid a judge's punishment, but to avoid spiritual corruption, to remain in right standing with the cosmos. The law becomes self-enforcing. The police are not just the authorities outside, they are the conscience within. This internalization of legal authority created governance systems of incredible stability. Generations could live under the same legal framework, never realizing that the laws protecting property or enforcing social hierarchies were ultimately the products of ancient power struggles, cleverly concealed behind the unassailable mask of divine revelation. The system could endure revolutions and dynastic changes because the true source of its power, the mythological justification, remained untouched, persuading each new generation that this was simply the way the world worked. And just as mythology provided the sacred backbone for law, it would next perform a similar magic on something equally foundational to society, the very concept of value and economic exchange. A simple coin stamped with an eagle or a crescent moon carried more than just economic value, it carried the weight of the heavens. Economic exchange was never a purely secular affair. It was woven into the cosmic order through ritual and story, becoming a sacred transaction that concealed the raw power dynamics of wealth and class. In the bustling markets of ancient Greece, merchants prayed to Hermes, the swift-footed god of commerce and thieves, before striking a deal. His presence transformed a simple bargain into an act with divine oversight, where an oath broken was not just a breach of contract but an offense against a god. This pattern was universal. In West African traditions, marketplaces were often sacred groves or crossroads protected by local deities, spaces where the chaos of trade was contained within a spiritual framework that ensured fairness and order. The goods themselves, from spices to textiles, were sometimes seen as gifts from the earth gods, their value imbued with a significance that went far beyond their practical use. The very tokens of trade were sanctified. The first Lydian coins bore the seal of a lion, a symbol of royal power, but soon coins everywhere were stamped with the faces of gods and emperors, or with sacred animals like owls for Athena. This fusion turned a piece of metal from a simple medium of exchange into a sacred object, its value guaranteed not just by a king's decree, but by the divine authority etched onto its surface. Merchant guilds in medieval Europe operated under the watchful eyes of patron saints, seeking divine favor for their ventures and framing their profit-seeking within a narrative of pious community service. This system reached its most structured form in the Hindu Varna system, where the commercial activities of the Vaisya caste, the merchants and farmers, were defined not as a job but as their dharma, their sacred duty in the cosmic order. Their profit was not mere greed, it was a sign of a world in balance, their success a fulfillment of a role assigned at the dawn of creation. The psychological power of this mechanism was breathtaking. It made profound economic inequality feel natural and spiritually necessary. The vast wealth accumulated by a merchant prince could be seen not as the result of exploitation or clever monopoly, but as a divine reward for properly fulfilling his cosmic duty. Conversely, the poverty of a laborer could be framed as a failure in spiritual adherence rather than a symptom of an unfair system. By embedding commerce within a mythological framework, the daily acts of buying and selling became rituals that reinforced the entire social hierarchy. The real power struggles over resources, the exploitation of labor, and the consolidation of wealth were all hidden behind a veil of divine mandate, making the economic structure of society feel as eternal and unchangeable as the stars. And just as mythology scripted our relationship with money and markets, it would next perform its final, most intimate act of control by taking command of the classroom and the nursery, shaping the minds of the next generation before they could even form a question. A child in ancient Athens did not simply memorize the Iliad, they absorbed a complete blueprint for their civilization. The 13th mechanism of control lies in education and mythological socialization, where foundational stories become the very air a society breathes, conditioning each new generation to accept the existing power structure as the only conceivable reality. Long before children could form a critical question, these narratives were etched into their minds not as one version of events, but as the sacred and unchangeable truth of the world. The Homeric epics were not mere literature for Greek youth, they were the core curriculum. Through the rage of Achilles and the cunning of Odysseus, boys learned the paramount importance of honor, loyalty to one's commander, and the glory of dying well in battle. Girls, hearing different tales, internalized models of fidelity, silence, and domestic virtue. These stories did not feel like propaganda, they felt like adventure, heroism, and destiny. This pattern is a universal constant of civilization. In East Asia, generations of students meticulously studied the Confucian classics, which wove a dense web of hierarchical relationships into the fabric of cosmic order. A son's duty to his father, a wife's obedience to her husband, a subject's loyalty to the emperor, these were not presented as social conventions but as expressions of the fundamental principle of harmony that governed the entire universe. To step outside your role was to create dissonance in the cosmos itself. In medieval European monastery schools and later in Sunday schools across the West, biblical stories served a similar function. The tale of David and Goliath reinforced the virtue of faith against overwhelming odds, while the obedience of Abraham prepared the listener to accept a higher authority without question. The sheer genius of this educational mechanism is its profound subtlety. It operates not through force but through familiarity. By the time an individual reaches maturity and gains the intellectual capacity to critique the world, the mythological framework is already deeply embedded. It feels like common sense, like the color of the sky or the force of gravity, not like a carefully constructed narrative designed to serve a specific class or gender. This early indoctrination creates a powerful psychological immune system. When a person later encounters facts or ideas that challenge the foundational myth, the new information feels alien and wrong, an attack on their core identity. The myth feels true, while the challenging fact feels like a mere opinion. This is how mythology conceals power struggles across generations, by ensuring that the battle is won in the nursery and the classroom, long before it can ever be fought in the public square. The stories become so deeply personal that defending the social order feels like defending your own soul. And just as these narratives were encoded in texts and lessons, they found an equally potent vehicle in the art that surrounded people from birth, decorating their temples and echoing in their songs. The soaring arches of a Gothic cathedral did more than reach for heaven, they pinned a divine social order into the very sky. For the medieval peasant, illiterate and unable to read the Latin Bible, the church building itself was the scripture. Its stained glass windows glowed with the passion of Christ and the terrors of the Last Judgment, while stone gargoyles and sculpted saints silently acted out a cosmic drama where every soul had a fixed, God-given place. The king was shown kneeling in devotion, the bishop with his hand raised in blessing, the peasant toiling in the fields, all framed as essential participants in a sacred hierarchy. This 14th mechanism, artistic expression as mythological reinforcement, used beauty and spectacle to make power structures feel emotionally inevitable. From the tomb paintings of Egyptian pharaohs presiding over the afterlife to the intricate carvings on Hindu temples depicting the god King Rama, those who controlled resources commissioned art that told their story. a story that always ended with their right to rule. The patronage system ensured that artists dependent on the church, the state, or a wealthy noble for their livelihood overwhelmingly produced work that flattered and legitimized their sponsors. A portrait of a Tudor monarch was not just a likeness, it was a visual argument for their divine right, surrounded by symbols of purity, justice, and imperial power. What makes this form of control so uniquely potent is its ability to bypass the critical mind entirely. You do not intellectually debate the carvings on a temple wall, you experience them. The awe inspired by a massive pyramid, the tranquility of a Buddha's smile, the thrilling heroism of a Hollywood epic where the cowboy tames the frontier, these artistic experiences create a visceral, emotional attachment to the underlying narrative. The beauty of the object makes the myth it represents feel beautiful, true, and transcendent. This emotional resonance gives artistically rendered mythology a durability that purely intellectual justifications often lack. A logical argument for a king's authority can be dissected and refuted, but the feeling of sacred awe you get standing in his cathedral is much harder to dismantle with reason. The aesthetic power of the story makes the political structure it supports feel equally magnificent and unchangeable, a fundamental part of the human emotional landscape. This deep, feeling-based attachment demonstrates why art has always been one of the most effective tools for concealing the raw, contingent nature of power, wrapping it in a splendor that feels beyond question. And just as mythology used art to script our emotions, it would soon attempt its most audacious move to commandeer the language of objective truth and reason itself. The stars moved not by physical law, but by divine decree, their paths charted by priests who served both the gods and the king. This 15th mechanism, the fusion of scientific development with mythological frameworks, reveals how the earliest forms of empirical knowledge were often born within the very institutions that mythology had created. From the Babylonian ziggurats to the Mayan observatories, the priestly class were the original scientists, meticulously recording the cycles of Venus and the patterns of eclipses. But this knowledge was never purely about understanding the cosmos. It was about translating its movements into a language of power. A celestial event was not merely an astronomical phenomenon. It was an omen, a message from the gods that only they could interpret. This gave them an unparalleled tool for political management. They could advise the king on the perfect day for a coronation, warn of impending doom that required public sacrifice, or declare divine favor for a military campaign, all based on their exclusive command of the celestial calendar. This created a fascinating intellectual tension. The careful observations of these early scientists sometimes threatened to unravel the very mythological stories that gave them their authority. The most famous rupture was Galileo's trial. His telescope provided evidence that the Earth revolved around the Sun, a direct challenge to the Church's Earth-centered cosmology, which was not just a scientific model but a theological pillar supporting the entire medieval worldview. If humanity was not at the center of God's creation, then the Church's role as the sole interpreter of that creation was thrown into doubt. His persecution was not simply about astronomy, it was about power. The new knowledge threatened to tear a hole in the mythological fabric that concealed the political and religious hierarchy. Yet, mythology's true genius lies in its astonishing adaptability. More often than not, emerging sciences were not presented as challenges, but as revelations that uncovered deeper layers of truth within the old stories. When Isaac Newton formulated his laws of motion and universal gravitation, he and his contemporaries often framed his work as deciphering the mathematical language God had used to write the universe. The new physics did not displace the divine, it simply revealed a more complex and orderly creator, one whose authority was now confirmed by the clockwork precision of the planets. This pattern of accommodation allowed mythological frameworks to survive seismic shifts in human knowledge, absorbing the shock of discovery by bending and reinterpreting rather than breaking. The system demonstrated a remarkable resilience, preserving its core function of concealing power relations, even as our understanding of the world was utterly transformed. And this same resilient pattern would next extend its reach into the most personal of all human experiences, the realm of health, sickness, and the human body itself. A fever was never just an illness, it was a spiritual imbalance requiring a story as much as a medicine. In the shadowy halls of the Greek Asclepieion, a patient seeking a cure did not merely receive a poultice. They underwent ritual purification, slept in a sacred abaton, and waited for the healing god Asclepius to visit them in a dream, his divine touch promising a remedy no mortal doctor could guarantee. This 16th mechanism, healthcare and mythological healing, reveals how the management of the human body itself became a primary theater for concealing power. Across traditions, the authority of the healer was almost always rooted in a mythological connection. The Ayurvedic physician in ancient India derived his knowledge from the cosmic stories of the Vedas, his practice an extension of a divine science. The shaman from Siberia to the Americas gained his power by journeying to the spirit world, negotiating with supernatural forces on behalf of the sick. Their credibility came not from clinical trials, but from their privileged access to a hidden, sacred reality. This created professional hierarchies that perfectly mirrored and reinforced the broader social order. The priestly healer was an intermediary, a gatekeeper to divine favor, and his position was thus unassailable by ordinary logic or challenge. What made this system so profoundly effective was its direct address to our deepest vulnerabilities. Facing pain, decay, and the terror of death, a purely material explanation can feel cold and meaningless. The mythological framework provided a profound comfort, transforming a random, terrifying bout of disease into a meaningful event, a test of faith, a punishment for sin, or a battle with malevolent spirits. This narrative gave the sufferer a role in a cosmic drama, making their endurance a spiritual act. For those in power, this was a masterstroke. By framing healthcare within these cosmic stories, the ruling class could position themselves as the patrons of divine healing, funding the temples and supporting the priestly physicians. The economic interests of the healing class were concealed beneath the sacred veil of their calling. A hefty donation to the temple was not a fee for service, it was an act of piety that might sway the gods. This system directed gratitude and loyalty upward, toward the religious and political structures that sponsored the healers, rather than fostering a critical examination of public health or sanitary conditions. The real power dynamics, the fact that access to effective care was often limited by class and wealth, was obscured by the narrative that true healing depended on faith and divine grace, commodities available to all, yet mysteriously granted only to some. This application of myth shows its ultimate flexibility, extending its concealing function even into the most intimate and scientific of domains, the human body. And just as these stories scripted our passage through sickness, they would next perform their final, most inevitable act by taking command of our journey out of life itself. A pharaoh's tomb was a machine for achieving immortality, its every ritual designed to navigate the terrifying landscape of the Juwat, the Egyptian underworld. This 17th mechanism, death rituals and mythological afterlives, reveals how the final human transition was meticulously scripted by myth to cement the power structures of the living world. The staggering resources poured into pyramids and mummification were not just about honoring a dead king. they were presented as essential investments in cosmic stability. The mythology taught that only a properly preserved and ritually sent pharaoh could join the sun god Ra on his nightly journey, fighting off the serpent of chaos to ensure the sun would rise again. The pharaoh's eternal destiny was directly tied to the survival of the world itself, making his absolute earthly authority a matter of universal necessity. This pattern of projecting social hierarchies into eternity is a global constant. In the Hindu tradition, funeral rites or antiesty vary significantly by caste. The chants, the rituals, and even the materials used in the cremation differ, reinforcing the very social distinctions that defined a person's life as they make their final passage. The message was unambiguous. Your place in the cosmic order, determined by your karma, did not end at death. It was confirmed by it. Similarly, in medieval Christianity, the sacrament of last rites required the intervention of a priest. Your soul's safe passage to heaven depended on this final absolution, a power that made the church and its hierarchy the indispensable gatekeeper to salvation. The psychological power of these death myths is devastatingly effective because they speak directly to our most profound fear, the terror of the unknown that follows death. They offer a map, a story that gives meaning to the end and promises some form of continuation. But this profound comfort comes with a hidden political clause. The story also assures you that your social position matters to your eternal destiny. A peasant taught that he would be rewarded in heaven for his humble station on earth had little reason to challenge the feudal lord. A merchant's family, performing elaborate Vedic rites, saw their wealth not as privilege but as a tool for ensuring a better rebirth, justifying the economic system that produced it. These myths create the ultimate incentive for accepting earthly hierarchies, making obedience and conformity a down payment on eternal peace. By making social position eternally relevant, mythology extends its concealing function beyond the very boundary of life, ensuring that the power arrangements of this world are mirrored in the geography of the next. And just as these stories mapped our journey through death, they would next perform a similar magic on something equally fundamental, the very measurement of time, turning the annual cycle into a sacred drama that repeated the same power structures year after year. The rhythm of time itself was never a neutral force, but a beat composed by those in power to keep society in step. The 18th mechanism of control reveals how calendar systems and mythological time structured human experience in ways that made authority feel as natural as the sunrise. The Maya long count calendar was far more than a complex timekeeping device. It was a vast mythological framework that connected the actions of kings directly to cosmic cycles. A ruler would schedule his most important ceremonies, his coronations or declarations of war, to align with the turning of these great cycles, presenting his political decisions as moments of cosmic significance mandated by the gods themselves. This pattern appears across civilizations with breathtaking consistency. Roman emperors did not hesitate to reshape time itself, adding months to the calendar and naming them after themselves, like Julius Caesar with July, literally inscribing their power onto the annual cycle. The Christian liturgical year organized all of time around the narrative of Christ's life, from Advent to Easter, making the foundational story of the Church the central rhythm of community life. What made this calendrical mythology so uniquely effective was its silent, pervasive quality. The very rhythm of daily, seasonal, and annual life became saturated with mythological meanings that reinforced a specific worldview. The pagan festivals of solstice and harvest were absorbed and reinterpreted by the Church, their ancient power harnessed to a new narrative. A farmer planting his crops did so according to a calendar that was also a sacred story, his labor framed by feasts and fasts that constantly reminded him of the spiritual hierarchy overseeing his world. By controlling how a community experienced and marked time, rulers could make their authority feel as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. The political order was no longer just a human arrangement. It was baked into the cosmic clockwork, its legitimacy renewed with every passing holy day and every new year celebrated under the watch of a king or a god. This embedding of power into the very fabric of time demonstrates mythology's ultimate ambition: to conceal political interests within the most fundamental structures of human experience, a project that reached its most physical form in the silent, imposing stones of sacred architecture. A stone pyramid did not merely mark a burial site, it physically anchored a pharaoh's divine power into the landscape for all eternity. This 19th mechanism of control, architectural spaces, and mythological power demonstrates how rulers used the very ground beneath our feet to make their authority feel as solid and unchangeable as the mountains. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia were not just temples, they were artificial mountains, physical stairways to the heavens that positioned the priest-king as the sole connector between the earthly and divine realms. His palace was often at the summit, a constant, visible reminder that his rule was a cosmic necessity, the only thing standing between the ordered city below and the chaos of the gods. This pattern of building power into stone repeats across the globe with breathtaking consistency. The Great Pyramid of Giza was precisely aligned with the pole star, embedding the pharaoh's tomb into the celestial machinery of the universe itself. A Hindu temple is not simply a place of worship, it is a cosmic mandala in stone, its intricate layout a map of the entire cosmos with the inner sanctum representing the world's spiritual center. To walk through its corridors was to traverse the universe, with every step reinforcing the idea of a divinely ordered reality where every being has a fixed place. The Gothic cathedral, with its impossibly high vaults and ethereal light filtering through stained glass, was a physical argument for a heavenly hierarchy. The sheer verticality of the space pulled your eyes and spirit upward toward God and his celestial court, while the earthly hierarchy of bishop, king, and commoner was mirrored in the church's very layout, from the ornate choir stalls to the humble nave. The psychological effectiveness of this architectural mythology is overwhelming. You do not just hear a story about power, you inhabit it. The crushing weight of the stone, the dizzying height of the ceilings, the deliberate path you are forced to walk, all of it creates a visceral, pre-conscious experience of your own smallness and the system's immense eternal strength. This physical reinforcement makes the social hierarchy feel as natural and unchangeable as the building itself. How could you question the king's right to rule when his palace is built like a mountain? How could you imagine a different social order when your entire town is laid out as a reflection of the cosmos? The architecture makes alternative arrangements literally unthinkable, because the physical environment provides no space for such thoughts to even form. The scale, the materials, the very air within these spaces all whisper the same message. This is not one way things could be, this is the way things must be. By making mythology tangible, architecture gave the concealing narrative a body, a permanent presence that surrounded people from birth to death, silently scripting their reality in a language deeper than words. And if stone and space could be used to shape thought, then the very words we speak were the next frontier for this silent conquest of the mind. The very words we speak carry the silent architecture of ancient power. Across countless cultures, sacred languages like Sanskrit, Biblical Hebrew, and Quranic Arabic were not merely tools for prayer. They were divinely sanctioned channels, the only proper means for communicating with the gods. This created an immediate and unassailable linguistic hierarchy. If you were not a priest or a scholar trained in these sacred tongues, your access to the divine was always mediated, always filtered through an elite class of interpreters. Your own everyday language was implicitly framed as inferior, unsuitable for the highest spiritual matters. This is the 20th mechanism, the way linguistic structures themselves embed mythological worldviews that shape our most fundamental perceptions. The kinship terms used in a society are a perfect example. In many cultures, the words for older and younger brother are distinct, immediately coding age-based hierarchy into every family conversation and reinforcing the idea that social position is inherent and natural. The metaphors we use without thinking often do similar work. We speak of a leader as the head of state, implying the citizens are the body, passive and requiring direction. We talk about the foundations of society or the fabric of the nation, using physical, unchangeable imagery to describe human arrangements that are actually fluid and contested. This connects to what linguists call the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that the structure of a language influences how its speakers perceive and think about the world. If your language has 10 different words for obedience but only one for rebellion, your cognitive landscape is already tilted toward accepting authority. The genius of this linguistic mythology is its profound invisibility. We do not hear the assumptions woven into our grammar, we simply experience them as reality itself. A speaker of English does not consciously decide that time is a resource to be spent, saved, or wasted. The metaphor is just baked into the language, shaping a frantic, productive mindset. When a language requires you to specify your social relationship to the person you are addressing through honorifics, it constantly reinforces hierarchical social structures in every single interaction. This makes linguistic control one of the most durable forms of all. You can overthrow a king and tear down his statues, but it is far harder to rewrite the unconscious grammar of your own thoughts. The stories become so fused with speech that they feel like common sense, making the power dynamics they conceal seem equally natural and inevitable. And just as mythology scripts our reality through language, it performs a similar, silent alchemy on the most basic of human needs, the food we place on our tables. A simple meal can become a powerful declaration of who you are and what you believe. Food cultures across the globe are saturated with mythological narratives that transform the basic act of eating into a ritual reinforcing social order. Consider the intricate dietary laws of ancient religious traditions, rules that went far beyond simple health guidelines. They were physical embodiments of cosmic stories about purity, community, and humanity's proper relationship with the divine. The Jewish kosher laws, with their strict separation of meat and dairy and their specific lists of clean and unclean animals, were not arbitrary restrictions. They created a tangible, daily boundary that defined a community's identity, setting them apart from their neighbors at every single meal. Every time a family chose not to eat pork or shellfish, they were physically enacting a mythological story of being a holy people, a nation set apart by God Himself. This dietary boundary was a silent but constant reinforcer of social cohesion, making their unique identity something they literally consumed and incorporated into their bodies. Similarly, the Hindu principle of ahimsa, or non-violence, is deeply woven into the mythological fabric of the Vedas and Upanishads. This sacred concept translated into widespread vegetarianism, a practice that was inextricably linked to the caste system and ideas of ritual purity. A Brahmin priest tasked with maintaining a state of purity to perform vital cosmic rituals would avoid meat to prevent the spiritual contamination associated with taking life. This dietary practice reinforced the social hierarchy, making the Brahmin's elevated status visible on his plate and in his body, while simultaneously framing this social distinction as a matter of cosmic law and spiritual sensitivity. Even the Christian ritual of communion performs a profound mythological transformation. A piece of bread and a sip of wine are not merely symbols, they are believed to become, in a sacred mystery, the body and blood of Christ. This act makes consumption the central ritual of the faith, binding the community together not just in belief, but through a shared, physical incorporation of the divine. The sheer genius of food mythology lies in its connection to our most basic biological necessity. You must eat to live. By linking specific food practices to cosmic principles, rulers and religious authorities could ensure that their mythological framework was ingested daily, becoming a part of the individual's very flesh and bone. The political function of these rules, whether to maintain group identity against assimilation or to reinforce a class hierarchy, was completely concealed behind the unassailable veil of divine commandment and sacred tradition. A person was not following a social regulation, they were practicing piety with every bite. This naturalized power dynamics through the most intimate and personal of choices, making social control feel like a matter of personal purity and identity. And just as mythology scripted what we put into our bodies, it would soon perform a similar magic on what we put onto them, scripting our very appearance to signal our place in the world. The fabric of your clothes could once determine your fate before you even spoke a word. In medieval Europe, sumptuary laws created a visual language of power, meticulously dictating who could wear silk, who was permitted the color purple, and how high a commoner's hat could rise. These were not mere fashion regulations, they were the social hierarchy made visible, and their justification was always rooted in a deeper mythological narrative about the divine order of the universe. A king wore ermine not just because it was expensive, but because its purity symbolized his sacred role. A peasant was restricted to coarse wool not merely due to poverty, but because his humble station was seen as a God-given place in the great chain of being. This pattern of sartorial control is a global constant. The pharaoh's double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt was not just a symbol of office, it was a physical claim to unification ordained by the gods. The sacred thread worn by Hindu Brahmins is not simple string. It is a tangible manifestation of their spiritual authority, a marker of caste that is literally woven into their identity from childhood. Even the specific tilak mark on a forehead can instantly communicate sect, social status, and religious devotion, all rooted in ancient cosmic stories. The profound effectiveness of clothing as mythology lies in its relentless visibility. Power arrangements are not locked away in legal texts, they walk the streets every day. You see the judge in her robes, the soldier in his uniform, the CEO in his tailored suit. These are not neutral choices, they are the modern echoes of those ancient codes, visual cues that command respect, signal authority, and reinforce a sense of place. The material itself tells a story, silk whispering of luxury and access, polyester speaking of practicality and mass production. The mythological narrative transforms these political distinctions into a matter of cosmic decorum, as if the universe itself would be thrown into chaos if a merchant wore the same shade of crimson as a duke. This turns every social interaction into a silent reinforcement of the structure, making the contingent seem customary and the political feel personal. Your very appearance becomes a canvas upon which the myths of power are constantly redrawn, a daily performance of a role written long before you were born. And just as our clothing scripts our social roles in silence, the music we hear and the performances we watch orchestrate our emotions to the same ancient score. A drumbeat could command a storm, and a sacred flute could summon the gods to walk among mortals. In ancient rituals from China to the Andes, musical modes were not artistic choices but precise technologies for maintaining cosmic harmony. The emperor's court musicians performed specific compositions at precise times of the year to ensure the seasons would turn and the harvest would be abundant. Control over these sonic traditions rested exclusively with the priestly and royal classes, who alone understood the dangerous power of melody and rhythm to either placate or enrage the forces of creation. This was mythological power translated directly into vibration, a form of control that operated not on the mind, but on the nervous system itself. Across the globe, musical systems consistently reinforced the social architecture. The intricate rules of Gregorian chant, with its monophonic texture and Latin texts, created an atmosphere of overwhelming reverence that reinforced the absolute authority of the medieval church. In the royal courts of China, Korea, and Japan, the rigidly structured gagaku and act traditions were sonic embodiments of Confucian hierarchy. Every instrument had its place, every note its fixed relationship to others, mirroring the ideal social order where every subject knew their station. The music itself was a political argument, its harmonious beauty presented as proof that the system it represented was equally balanced and right. Even in rebellion, music fights with mythological weapons. The protest songs of the American labor movement or the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa did not invent new stories. They channeled the deep, familiar currents of gospel spirituals and folk ballads, wrapping new political demands in the comforting, authoritative sound of tradition. This gave their calls for change a feeling of inevitability, as if they were not demanding something new, but restoring a sacred order that had been broken. The true genius of musical mythology lies in its ability to bypass our critical faculties entirely. A logical argument for a king's divine right can be debated, but the soaring chords of a coronation anthem can make you feel it in your bones. The complex mathematics of a raga, said to have been revealed by the gods, or the hypnotic rhythm of a shaman's drum, creates an emotional experience that feels transcendently true. The musical structure itself, the very scales and harmonic progressions, carries a hidden worldview. The Western resolution from dissonance to consonance can feel like a narrative of conflict moving toward perfect order, subtly naturalizing a preference for stability and hierarchy. When you are swept up in the collective emotion of a hymn or a national anthem, the social arrangements tied to that music feel just as moving and inevitable. This visceral alignment of feeling and narrative strengthens the concealing function of myth in a way words alone never could, preparing our bodies to understand how power scripts our very movement. A king's authority was once performed not only through laws but in the elegant turn of a wrist and the precise placement of a foot. The elaborate court dances of Renaissance Europe transformed ballrooms into living theaters of power, where every bow and graceful sweep of the arm physically enacted the myth of divine right. A nobleman leading his partner through a pavane was not just dancing, he was demonstrating his place in a celestial hierarchy, his controlled movements mirroring the orderly revolutions of the planets around a royal sun. This physical grammar of power extended far beyond European palaces. In the sacred temples of India, classical dancers still perform stories from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, their intricate hand gestures or mudras and fluid body movements giving physical form to cosmic principles of Dharma and the eternal cycle of creation and destruction. Each performance embeds these mythological truths into the very muscles and bones of the dancer, while allowing the audience to witness the cosmic order made flesh. Similarly, the powerful, synchronized dances of African royalty were not merely entertainment. They were displays of collective strength and unwavering loyalty to the chief, their rhythmic stomps and unified chants making the community's political structure a visceral, shared experience. The sheer genius of movement as mythology lies in its somatic dimension. its ability to bypass the intellect entirely and speak directly to the body. A story read in a book can be debated, but a story felt in the surge of a ceremonial dance or the solemn procession of a ritual is experienced as a profound, self-evident truth. The narrative becomes inseparable from the physical sensation, creating an attachment to the underlying power structure that is incredibly difficult to dislodge through reason alone. This is how dance conceals political origins so effectively, by making social arrangements something you feel in your heartbeat and your breath, transforming abstract authority into an undeniable physical reality. A modern political rally echoes with the same narrative architecture that once resonated in ancient temples. Campaigns today do not speak of gods and heroes in the traditional sense, yet they construct powerful myths of national destiny, heroic leaders who alone can save us, and sinister external threats that must be vanquished. These are not random messages, they are carefully crafted mythological frameworks, updated for a digital age but performing the very same function of concealing raw power struggles. The candidate is not merely a person seeking office, but a protagonist in a grand story of decline and renewal, of us versus them, of a promised land just beyond the horizon. This narrative alchemy transforms the messy, pragmatic negotiation of policy and resource distribution into a sacred, existential crusade. What makes this modern mythology so potent is its clever disguise. It presents itself not as myth but as common sense. It cloaks itself in the language of pragmatism and data, while its emotional core is pure archetype. The ancient claim of divine right has simply been rebranded as historical or economic inevitability. We are told that a certain policy is unavoidable, that globalization is an unstoppable force, that the market demands certain sacrifices. These are the new cosmic decrees, presented not by a priest interpreting omens, but by a talking head on a screen analyzing charts. Similarly, the rigid social hierarchies justified by ancient creation myths have been repackaged as the natural outcomes of a meritocratic system. Vast inequalities in wealth and opportunity are no longer framed as a divine blueprint from the body of Purusha, but as the fair and logical result of individual effort and talent. The story insists that the system is neutral and just, and therefore your position within it is entirely your own doing. This conceals the underlying power dynamics that shape access to education, capital, and social networks, transforming what could be a political critique into a matter of personal failure or success. The mechanisms are hauntingly familiar. The external threat, once a chaos monster like Tiamat, is now a faceless terrorist network, an immigrant caravan, or a rival nation portrayed as an existential danger. The control of interpretation, once the exclusive domain of priests reading hieroglyphs, is now in the hands of media empires and algorithmically curated news feeds that tell us what reality means. The political brand functions like a tribal totem, a symbol that inspires loyalty and identity far beyond any rational policy platform. We are living not in a post-mythological age, but in an era of stealth mythology, where the stories are more pervasive and powerful because we are taught not to see them as stories at all. This persistent recurrence, from the pharaoh's coronation to the presidential debate, reveals something fundamental about human psychology. We crave the order, meaning, and identity that narrative provides. The real power struggle has never been over resources alone, but over who gets to author the dominant story that makes sense of those resources. As we stand at this crossroads of history, watching these ancient patterns play out with new technology, one question becomes inevitable. If mythology has constantly adapted to conceal power for thousands of years, what forms will it take next? The glowing screen in your hand now whispers the oldest stories of power, perfectly repackaged for a digital age. We are witnessing the birth of a 26th mechanism, digital mythology, where new creation myths are written in lines of code and apocalyptic fears are stoked by algorithmic feeds. The legendary founder who starts a company in a garage is our modern culture hero, his journey a familiar archetype that sanctifies the vast influence of tech empires. Terrifying narratives of a runaway artificial intelligence serve as our contemporary chaos monsters, justifying unprecedented levels of surveillance and control under the guise of protection. And the shimmering promise of a technological utopia, a world saved by innovation alone, functions as a powerful salvation myth that directs our gaze away from the immense concentrations of wealth and authority happening right now. Digital mythology is not a break from tradition, but its logical and terrifying evolution. The algorithms that shape our social media feeds and search results have become the high priests of this new order, curating a personalized reality for every user. They learn our deepest fears and our most fervent hopes, then feed us the narratives that will most effectively capture our attention and align our behavior with the economic interests of the platform. A story about a political opponent can be delivered to one person as a tale of a corrupt villain, and to another as an account of a misunderstood patriot, all while the system claims perfect neutrality. This is the modern concealing function in action, the insistence that the platform is merely a mirror reflecting our own choices, rather than a powerful actor shaping those choices to serve its own ends. The scale and intimacy of this new mythology are unprecedented. Unlike a pharaoh's decree carved on a distant stone, these digital stories reach us in our pockets, our living rooms, and our beds, tailored to our individual psychological profiles with a precision that ancient priests could never have imagined. The result is a fragmentation of shared reality itself, where common myths that once bound a society together are replaced by millions of personalized narratives, each one reinforcing a different version of the world and solidifying the power of those who control the digital architecture. This demonstrates mythology's breathtaking adaptability. It has seamlessly migrated from the temple to the television to the smartphone, constantly finding new vessels to carry its ancient function of disguising the mechanics of control. Our fundamental human need for meaning, for a story that explains our place in the world, is now being harnessed by the most sophisticated tools ever invented, ensuring that the silent struggle for power continues, hidden behind the friendly interface of a screen. This journey through 26 mechanisms reveals a profound and unsettling pattern. Mythology is humanity's most enduring and adaptable technology for concealing power. Its primary function across every civilization has been to perform a kind of narrative alchemy, transforming fragile, contingent political arrangements into cosmic necessities. A king's power is not just inherited, it is woven into the movement of the stars. Economic inequality is not an injustice, it is a spiritual test. Social hierarchies are not human inventions, they are reflections of a divine body. From the divine right of pharaohs to the digital myths of our own age, the core mechanism remains shockingly consistent. It makes what is arbitrary feel inevitable, and what is constructed feel natural. The true power of these stories does not lie in their factual truth, but in their profound ability to satisfy our deepest human hungers for meaning in a chaotic world, for order in our social lives, and for a sense of connection to something larger than ourselves. Mythology provides this profound psychological comfort, but it does so while quietly serving the interests of those already in positions of authority. This is the great and enduring concealment. Recognizing these ancient patterns is not an academic exercise. It gives us a crucial set of tools for deciphering our own world, where mythology continues to operate in stealth mode, hidden within the very language of news, politics, and technology we consume every day. The most vital skill we can cultivate now is a form of mythological literacy, the practiced ability to spot these concealing narratives as they unfold around us. It means learning to ask when we are presented with a story that feels unquestionably true, what power arrangements is this narrative making seem natural? Who benefits from us accepting this reality as inevitable? This awareness moves from being intellectually interesting to being essential for our collective future. In an increasingly complex and interconnected global society, our ability to see through the fabric of these stories is the first step toward weaving a new one, a social reality built not on concealed power, but on conscious choice, transparency, and a more equitable vision for our shared world. The patterns are now visible, the work of unraveling and reweaving